Welcome to Occupational Queerpy, a podcast run by an occupational therapy student exploring the intersection of occupational therapy and the LGBTQIA+ experience. This podcast offers personal perspectives for informational and educational purposes only. We'll be discussing a wide range of LGBTQIA+ topics, and to authentically reflect the community, we'll be using common and slang terms which some listeners may find explicit. Listener discretion is advised. And we're recording. We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Occupational Queerpy. I'm your host, Trent. And today we are talking about queer mental health. And who do we have here to discuss queer mental health? We have a straight man, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hansen. Hello.
Hello.
You may speak.
My name's Noah Hansen. I teach here at Arkansas College of Health Education in the OT department, and I teach one of the courses that I teach is mental health, and that's been a main focus of my practice in my career.
Can you give a little bit of your OT history?
Yeah, I started, I graduated from UCA, University of Central Arkansas, and have practiced primarily in pediatrics and mental health, and pediatric mental health. That's been my kind of career path. I've done some work exclusively in pediatrics, more in kind of developmental preschools, but also worked a lot with chronic mental illness, with individuals experiencing homelessness. My research has been focused a lot on chronic mental illness and in vulnerable populations, so a lot of work with individuals experiencing homelessness, but also maybe other individuals, like in terms of clients, different vulnerable populations.
Awesome. So why are you here? Why are you on my gay podcast?
Yeah, I mean, I think one reason was probably because I'm your faculty advisor.
That's true.
That probably can't be overlooked.
Yeah.
But I think that I was really excited for you to cover this topic because I do always want to make it very clear that I recognize that as a heterosexual, cisgender, white male, I cannot appreciate fully what the challenges or the experiences of someone that identifies in categories that are often marginalized, namely any of the identifiers in LGBTQIA populations. But I do care deeply for this population for a number of reasons. More than anything, I think it's important that as an OT and as OTs and OTs that care about mental health, that we recognize the additional challenge it is to exist in a largely cis-hetero world when you don't feel perhaps represented, maybe you don't feel like individuals that are allegedly there to help you understand you. And so I try to listen a lot, and I try to be involved in ways and spaces that are welcome for allies and not take up space, energy, time in spaces that it's better to be a cheerleader and not a leader. Mm-hmm. On campus, I'm the faculty representative for the LGBTQ Healthcare Alliance, the student organization.
Yeah, gay club,
yeah. But like as an example with that, if we happen to have a faculty member that identifies within that population that is interested in being the leader of that, I would celebrate stepping aside and letting them, kind of do that role.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think you love sharing this story, but can you tell about how did you come to discover that I, in fact, was a homosexual? How many hours did it take before you could clock it?
Well, I will say that while I do love sharing the story, I'm also quite embarrassed to share the story because I don't know that, I was I started my job here at AIC at the same time that your class, Trent's class, was the inaugural class, and so kind of my first day was also their first day. And I had reached out to the RSOs and the person that was being the faculty advisor for that particular RSO at the time welcomed some help, and so we were kind of faculty advisors for a while. And I was really wanting the RSO was dominated by the medical school at the time, and I wanted to make sure that if we had any representation in our OT class, that they felt comfortable about joining the RSO and knew about it. And I had overheard Trent say a few things that had led me to believe that he might indeed be gay. But, this is actually, it's kind of illustrative of the challenge that we have of you don't want to define someone solely based on one kind of stereotype, certainly. You also don't want to define someone entirely by their sexuality or their gender identity. That's not all of who they are, but it is maybe an important part of who they are. And so I, probably in the most awkward way possible, approached Trent and was like, I'm not saying anything, but I'm not making any assumptions here, but I happen to be the RSO faculty advisor for this group, and if this is something that maybe you might like to do, I'm not sure, I'm not saying it. And so I had 100 clarifiers. Of course, Trent being Trent, in his most dramatic way possible, pretended for a brief moment that he was offended and that he was indeed not gay, but he even did that in, let's face it, the gayest way possible.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
But yeah, I think that I actually tell that story sometimes because it does highlight, even with maybe clients that we engage with, or if we want to be supportive but we don't want to make assumptions. And how do we make someone feel safe and, comfortable sharing something that may be an important part of their person? How do we make sure that they know that we will support them? And how do we know that we will support them appropriately? I think it's complex. It's not easy to figure out how to do that sometimes.
Complex. Would you say nuanced?
I would also say nuanced. Yeah. Two of my favorite words.
So I think, we were talking about mental health, right? That's the episode. But I think when people hear mental health, they think OT in the mental health setting, right? But as occupational therapists or a future occupational therapist, we're looking at the whole person, and part of a person is their mental health. So I feel like in order to have good OTs, you need to address mental health, or at least acknowledge mental health in all clients.
Yeah, definitely. Although I do think that it's critical for us as clinicians to appreciate that in most contexts in the world right now, having queer identity, any facet of queer identity, makes someone much more vulnerable to not only initial mental health challenges, so susceptibility to anxiety and depression, and just challenges with happiness and life satisfaction. That it also, the barrier there is, okay, so you're already more susceptible because of stereotypes, discrimination, isolation, lack of community, inability to express yourself fully in some settings. So you're susceptible to those because of all those reasons. Again, I want to be clear, societally driven, not internally driven.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that's ever been demonstrated that having a queer identity in and of itself does not make you susceptible to mental health challenges.
Yeah.
It's how society at large receives or does not receive that identity and support that identity. So you're more susceptible in the front end, but also the idea of accessing care creates even more challenges because it can be
terrifying.
Oh, hugely anxiety producing if you, again, especially in certain contexts and geopolitical settings, here in the South, right? Arkansas is, you don't know what someone's going to say. I mean, I think as horrifying as this is, there's the possibility you could go to a mental health provider that whether they say it or not, still believes in conversion therapy or something, quite heinous. So then you have the anxiety and the mental health challenge of accessing care. And then once you do access care, even knowing how much of my person can I disclose, or even maybe you're going for totally non-queer identity reasons, right? You just, like everyone, may struggle with some anxiety or some depression, somewhat unrelated to that. And you also may have the challenge of, is this person only going to see queer identity if I disclose that, and sort of overly focus on that. I think that the knowing how to, as a clinician, being very sensitive and thoughtful about how to let the client guide you on how much of that they feel comfortable or want incorporated within the treatment is really critical.
In order to do that, as an ally, straight man, like, what do you, when you're engaging with clients, is there something you do in order to, like, kind of give hint that you are an ally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I do think that we can't underestimate subtle things that make people feel comfortable. So, as something as simple, although I guess now it's become quite controversial, but having pronouns on a sign-off on an email.
What are your pronouns?
Yeah, and I think that even being, if you have intake forms, if you have questions that, you're asking them on the front end, maybe in not like an asynchronous sort of way, so that they're filling out without you kind of being in their presence. Different questions that indicate, like, I recognize your identity as meaningful. Things like, as maybe quaint as this is now, I think having a pride pin or a pride demonstration somewhere in the space that you treat, or on your person, can be quite helpful. And I think maybe more than anything is that the first time those concepts come up, that you are not reactionary to them, or you don't treat them as something odd or different or out of your comfort zone. So, I think that there are individuals, clinicians, that strive in their own way to be welcoming, but they're quick to say, well, I don't know anything about that, or that's really outside of my knowledge. But if you did the equivalent of the non-queer version of whatever that is, they might not have that same reaction. Or they would be willing, for example, to listen and then educate themselves so that they could be helpful without necessarily disclosing to the client, like, I'm out of my depth. But if you, whether it's the issue directly about maybe sex or relationship stuff, or which is always, very involved with mental health, rather than, again, one, making sure that you're not having, even unintentionally, some sort of confused or negative reaction, but also educating yourself. If there's something new or different that you haven't heard of, is going and finding that out. I think also I have found it to be effective to, if there, after that, maybe a first disclosure or something that is said that has opened the door to the discussion of queer identity within the therapy realm, is to let the person know, I want you to correct me if I say something that is incorrect. Not being clear, not that it is your job to educate me. I would like to educate myself, but I do not want to continue to say something or do something within the therapy environment that is harmful to you. And it certainly would be unintentional, but I want to make sure I don't do it if it is.
Okay, so I kind of want to talk about myself.
Okay.
Can we do that?
I mean, that's always what I expect from you, Trent.
So, yeah, it's kind of my thing. So, as a queer person, as a gay man, growing up in the South in kind of a religious area, religious household, I think a lot of anxiety and, stress came with that. And I kind of want to share a story.
I would love to hear a story.
I've told you this story before, but I'm
okay.
telling the people now. It's the Kindle story.
This is my favorite story.
So I told him this.
And I say my favorite story just because I find it deeply saddening, but also meaningful.
Right. But when I was telling you, I have to look back and laugh now because it's just absolutely insane. But this is where my mind was at when I was a young gay kid in the closet in the South. So I had Kindle, like an electronic book. It was like new age technology at the time. But I was browsing different books on, the shop or whatever, the e-store. And I stumbled upon like a gay genre section. Gay smut, if you will. 50 Shades of Grey, but for gay guys. And I accidentally, while I was like reading the bios, I didn't buy any of these. But while I was reading the bios, accidentally clicked buy. And my heart just dropped into my chest because my heart is in my chest. It dropped even lower than where it sits normally. And because my mom's email is connected to that Kindle, right? And so I'm like, I'll bleep that. Yeah. But that's what I was thinking. So I panicked. I hid my Kindle somewhere deep in the recesses of my room. And I just didn't. I never used it again. Time goes by. I pretend to be sick one day. Well, actually, let me backtrack.
Yeah, I think there's an interaction with your mom preceding this.
Yeah. Okay. So my mom, I don't remember like how many days later or the same day, whatever. My mom sits me down on the staircase of our house, and she said, Trent, I got an email saying that this book was purchased, and it was obvious. I don't remember the title, but it was obviously gay. To the point where she's like,
gay sex book about gay sex.
Man on man.
Yeah, exactly.
But she's like, did you purchase this? And I'm like, no, my Kindle, it got stolen at school. It was in my locker. Someone must have came in and grabbed it.
Thinking on the fly here.
Exactly. I must not. It's been gone for weeks. And she's like, okay. And she didn't really question it, but we won't get into that. So I feel like
we will get into that in a minute.
Yeah. I feel like I slid by. So a few days passed, few weeks, I don't remember. But there's a day, I had sick days where I just couldn't get out of bed. I faked one of them. I wasn't actually like depressed or anxious this day.
You had a mission.
I was on a mission. So I missed school, and when everyone's gone, and I'm sure the coast is clear, I pull the Kindle from its hiding place, and I take it out back to like our shed or shop where the tools are held. I get one of my dad's sledgehammers, and I smashed that Kindle into like 1,000 pieces. And that's not enough for me though.
Right. What did you do with the pieces?
People still could find the evidence and put it together that it was a Kindle. I proceeded to pick up the pieces and distribute them in trash cans around our house and our shop because I was scared that people would see, oh, this is the Kindle that Trent said was stolen, and there was a gay book bought on it. So he bought the gay book. He's gay. That's like the level of fear I lived in back then. It's gotten better now. There's still fear, obviously, especially in March of 2025. It's pretty shitty right now, but that's just where my head was at. Like, it was a do or die situation.
Well, I think that the first time I heard that story, the thing that struck me immediately was that feeling of having mental anguish without the ability to put that anywhere. There's nobody you can talk to. There's no, therapy you can engage in. There's no outlet. And I think as clinicians, we have to appreciate that we may be working with individuals that has been their experience up to that point. And so they're going to be cautious. I mean, and you may have shared this on already in another episode of the podcast, but coupled with that, probably the most powerful non-familial situation I've ever had related to queer identity was when we presented together about just sort of doing an in-service teaching about how to be more inclusive, more welcoming to the LGBTQ plus community. And Trent, you were standing up. You let me do kind of some of the teaching, and then you were going to talk about Trent, one of your favorite things.
Yes.
And you started to talk, and you said, I remember vividly, you said the statement, "I'm Trent Gaddis, and I'm a gay man." And you paused, and you got emotional. And you
I'm
said,
tearing up right now.
Me too. I was crying behind Trent because you said, you told everyone, you said that I feel like that's a bad thing to say. Even though I know it's not, even though I'm proud of who I am, there's a piece of you that still feels that that's a negative thing.
Yeah.
And how deep that challenge to your identity is. And I'm going to go a little bit further even, and I don't know if you can cut this from the podcast if you don't want it shared, but one of the things that we love about Trent is he has these things called bits.
We love a bit.
We love a bit. And Trent is notorious for his various stages. He has, his Stanley stage, his Bagolino stage. Bagolini, sorry.
Where are my Maxinistas at?
Yeah. But I've talked with you before, and
yes.
I've said that there's nothing wrong with those bits. They're hilarious and they're fun, but sometimes I'm saddened by the fact that I think at least a part of those bits is that it is easier to have a bit rejected than to have the real Trent rejected.
Absolutely.
And I think many of our friends and loved ones in the LGBTQ plus community experience that same thing, is that there are behaviors that we engage in that defend against the pain. Mm-hmm. And so when we're working with a client, I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, that there's been a lot of impromptu armors put on, impromptu defenses laid to just exist. Mm-hmm. And how critical it is for us to value those to some degree, but also try our best to help someone feel comfortable enough to be their true self. But again, I want to be clear, not demand that, because, if your bit is all you can give me right now, I can definitely work with that too.
Yeah, we've tried to deconstruct the bits, and I love a bit. I still have my bits, but I definitely am more aware of the usage as, like you said, a shield to, like, if someone doesn't like what I'm saying, well, that's my bit. Right. Like, it's not me as a person. Mm-hmm. And I still struggle with that. And I kind of want to touch on just different common mental health issues because we talked about anxiety and depression being really prevalent in the queer community. But I think also substance use and misuse is huge. And from experience, I've never really talked about this, but I definitely, like, the bits I've had bits for a long time, but I feel like a huge coping mechanism I use, like, especially in undergrad, I drank a lot. I got drunk constantly, like, every weekend. And if I were to act a fool, or if I was, like, stupid or crazy, well, they don't hate me. Like, I was drunk.
Right. If I stopped the substance, then it would be
it's
totally
just
fine.
Me. Yeah. So I feel like that is used a lot in the queer community just to either, like, get rid of the anxiety, and it definitely did help get rid of the anxiety, but also is like a shield.
Yeah, and I think that that's absolutely true, is that substance use for all people, one of the mechanisms or one of the reasons is to deaden the pain, right?
Yeah.
Or an escapism type behavior. And again, why it can be such a challenge in the LGBTQ plus community is that because of the way that society has framed and treated queer identity, it is a logical route of escapism. And honestly, sometimes too, it is a normalizing behavior, right? So if you don't feel a part of the, I mean, we also know that peer pressure with young people and substance use is often associated. So again, more likely, because if you already feel uncomfortable, if you already don't feel a part of the group and you go, well, I could get drunk with them, maybe that would mean that they would like me.
Yeah.
So it kind of works on both sides of that, particularly in young queer identity.
For sure.
And then there's just the aspect of dulling pain. I mean, if you are struggling with existing in your own self, and you've been told that the identity that you know is a part of who you are is fundamentally wrong, why would you not find some mode, some substance, some pill, to some liquid to make that go away? The other thing when I think about substance use and queer identity is that when a person within their own, the messaging that they have for themselves and the messaging that other people have had for them creates this internal dichotomy or cognitive dissonance, I mean, is really a better word for it, is that pressure within a person is so great sometimes that something has to give. And that's often where we see substance use, is when someone is struggling with that cognitive dissonance. And I mean, even from the story that we mentioned earlier, that it's not easy to be proud of something in yourself that you've been told your whole life is wrong.
Yeah. And
that creates such a horrific pressure within yourself that, again, substance use is a likely mode of dealing with that. I think even too, like in all social settings, we have used substances as social lubricants, let's say.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think, again, so if you're like Trent, you're a young gay man that is only partially out, and you are wanting to explore that identity, but also feel guilt and shame about that identity, but are also just generally normal nervous about engaging in the social realm, right, particularly the romantic social realm, then yeah, substances seem like a great idea, because I've got to get the gumption up to do this thing that I have all of these wild mixed emotions about. And so we could, again, the susceptibility is higher. I mean, it's almost like a normalized behavior, because all young people, generally young people do this. But because of that additional barrier that exists for the queer identity, it's maybe a little more likely that it's going to happen.
I remember that just made me think of, like, coming out to my mom. I'm not even going to get into the long, like, insane story that is coming out. Maybe another, that'd have to be its own episode. But I remember I was staying at my friend's apartment, and my mom asked if she could come over. We kind of had a falling out for a week or so. And she messaged me via Facebook, because she took my phone. And she said, hey, can I talk to you? And I said, yeah. So she drove up to Fayetteville, hour and a half to see me. And I was staying with my friends at the time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, I feel it. This is the time. I'm going to do it. I'm going to come out. Like, I'm telling my mom tonight. What did I do to, get the nerves
smashed.
to do that? I was throwing back shots. Like, it was insane. Like, I was drunk when I told her. I do remember telling her, but, like, definitely that alcohol gave me the courage.
Yeah, and again, even just the thinking about the mental strain of that is heartbreaking, really, because there are so many things if everything is going perfectly, that are hard, right? And when life is about as easy as you can design it, there are significant mental health challenges and just normal steps to the process.
Absolutely.
And so to add on to that, this societally created shame and guilt and burden is so heartbreaking for those individuals that are dealing with that. Again, pitch to OTs to engage in the practice of mental health that don't have a support that looks at their whole life, that looks at everything, holistically at who they are. And I do think that's where OT in the realm of mental health support for queer identity can really play a vital role, is that we are not boxed in by a psychoanalytic framework. We are allowed to explore all aspects of a person's being, their environment, their occupations, and think about all of the potential supports within those concepts, because we can help think about what's a queer safe environment. How can we modify the environment to be more queer friendly? How can we look at your occupations to be more supportive or developing for your queer identity? And then certainly the things within your person, how do we address those different occupational categories or habits, your roles, to be more safe, more healthy, more desired from a queer identity standpoint.
Yeah. I kind of want to jump back to something.
I would love to.
Speaking of like our story you shared of like how you found out I was gay, or you asked essentially, and you said there was like a discomfort, like it was super awkward. It was weird, and I loved it because you acknowledged that it was uncomfortable, but you still pushed through, and I'm thankful. Like that was super early on in us knowing each other, but you putting yourself out there and pushing through like that awkwardness and the uncomfortability, like it allowed us to establish that relationship. So as awkward as it was, like I really appreciated it.
I think that one thing that is important, and maybe this is something we could go back and even talk about as it relates to how do you make someone feel comfortable, and I think is seeding the power dynamic, is allowing yourself to be in a vulnerable place that it could, again, I would go back and do that probably slightly differently if we were going to do it again.
Sure.
But I think that more than anything, it was that I was concerned that there was a resource that you didn't know about, and a willingness to offer that. Again, I want to be really clear that you want anybody you're working with, you want them to be able to guide how much of that they want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
But I think that I had felt, based on some things I'd overheard, that this would be something that you would want to be a part of.
Right.
And you were very interested in leadership, and I thought, oh, this would be a cool opportunity. I know that we struggle sometimes in the RSO to get leadership. And so, yeah, I think that that's a good point, that being willing to be uncomfortable, those that have queer identity are always forced to be out of their comfort zone.
Yes.
That's 100% of the time, because we live in a cis hetero world. Not that it should be that way, but that is the way that it has been designed.
Yeah.
And so I think we have an obligation as OTs, both in our personal and professional life, to seek some of that discomfort.
Yeah.
Because I think it helps us to understand. We will never fully understand if that's not part of who we are, but to better understand how constant that is. Like if, I think that we've talked about this before, Trent, but let's say that we're having a conversation in class and the issue of relationships and sex comes up, which happens in OT, right? Do you feel totally comfortable to bring up your sexual experience?
Probably not. I mean, this program, I will say, I've said it before on here, but they've done a really good job of making me feel comfortable. And we're a really small, tight-knit class. And I feel like my classmates have done a really good job of making me comfortable. But at the same time, I don't think I'd ever disclose my sex life to y'all in like a classroom setting, or just like dates I've been on and stuff. Like I have been out and gay and proud here, but yeah, there's still some lines like y'all didn't establish like the lines, but I have been told where those lines are in the past. Yeah,
and probably emphatically, right?
Exactly. So,
and I think that's the thing, is that we have to create some discomfort in that, even with classmates. Yeah. Right? Even in that environment, because it's viewed differently, right? And that we can play a role as OTs in shifting to establish more normative thought around queer identity. And that can be, creating space, taking the time to have additional conversation. So if we were going to, let's say, have a conversation about sex in class, is to meet with a gay student ahead of time and say, hey, this is going to be a topic. What would be your perspective that would need to be included? Or how can I create an atmosphere in the class that would allow you to feel comfortable to share your perspective? Or if you don't feel comfortable sharing your perspective, what could I say that would be respectful and thoughtful and welcoming to that conversation?
Yeah, I love that.
But I think it requires extra effort, but it demands extra effort. We have that obligation and responsibility. There's probably a lot of OTs that maybe, let's say, deal with sex as a regular topic because of their particular practice area. But I would wonder how familiar they are with different queer sex topics, whether that is, issues of female sex or male sex, or how transgender identity is involved with engaging in sex. And again, this goes back to the obligation to educate yourself. You can't just wait until somebody comes into your treatment space and go, oh, well, I've never heard of that. It's just like you would educate yourself and find avenues to improve your clinical skills in those other areas, you would want to do that for queer identity as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's happening as much as I think that it should. And imagine if you're in a different space and someone asks you, hey, what about your job? Or tell me something interesting about your job. If you can talk about the amazing opportunity to support queer identity through your work as an OT, those small conversations and those small engagements outside of the treatment space also go a long way to simply normalizing
For sure.
the identity.
Yeah, I think the normalization's a big thing. I feel we've come a long ways in terms of acceptance of queer people, but I think there's still that discomfort, not necessarily hate or intolerance, but I think some straight people, me speaking as a gay man, I'm going to
stereotype me.
I feel like some straight people are hesitant to approach that kind of conversation for fear of offending.
Absolutely. And I think that I'll give you an example too of something that I think comes up a lot is
Please.
that humor is something we use a tremendous amount. But you have to be very conscientious about humor as it relates to queer identity as a non-queer person,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And I'll be the first to raise my hand and say the number of apology text messages that I've sent after a conversation where I'm like, did I cross a line? Was that appropriate? And it was, most of the time it's received as, oh, I didn't think about it. That wasn't a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like it's on me to police myself while engaging fully, but also recognizing that that's not my identity. Mm-hmm. I cede to someone else the responsibility, or not the responsibility, but the power to correct me or to regulate some of those interactions. But it's on me to be bold and brave enough to not treat it differently than I would another thing, right? Mm-hmm. So if I'm not gonna not engage with you on a topic, Trent, because you're a gay man, right? And I want to be conscientious that I don't do that, because like you said, if I just leave the topic alone, then I won't offend, it won't be a problem. Or worse is if something's said, just hoping that it just goes away and that we don't have to get deep into it. We have to be bold and courageous, but also always thoughtful about, I always think about, just like I said earlier, about I will celebrate the day when a queer identity faculty member says, hey, straight guy, get out of the way. You don't need to be the leader of this RSO. always want to, as both a person and as an OT, find ways to lift people up. And, even in this conversation, right, I don't need to be the leader on OT mental health as it relates to queer identity. I'm always willing to talk about it, always willing to give voice to that, but I hope that there are more and more practitioners and people that feel comfortable enough to be out and to be demanding their role in that space.
Yeah.
Like a future Trent Gaddis OTD.
I could do it.
Yeah.
I could do that. And I know I do shit on you a lot for being a straight white man, but
Valid though, right?
I feel like a majority of people, hopefully people tuning in, are straight allies or people that want to be better and educate themselves. So I think it's really good you coming on here as a ally and giving perspective on how you can approach a queer person, because I feel all the other guests I've had so far, and I think that I'm going to have, are queer people, and we can give our perspective all day of like what we want to see or like what's worked best for us that we've seen. But I think hearing you and how you've practiced as an ally approaching these conversations is really beneficial to the listeners.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I hope that always continues to be the case. And I certainly am excited, and I love the capstone idea and this format. I think that the more ways that we can reach people and help them feel comfortable, the better.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, this has been fun. This has been good. We're wrapping up now, though.
All right, got to end it.
Okay, to the people, the listeners, is there anything, if they could leave this episode with one piece of information? I would like for them to leave with all of it, but
right.
If there was one nugget, what nugget are we feeding them?
I think that if I was going to sum up, or to maybe the most important takeaway is that when you're working in OT, and working specifically in OT and mental health, a person's sexuality and gender identity may not be the most important thing to everyone.
Yeah.
But it is definitely important to everyone. And we have to, one, educate ourselves as frequently and often as we can about the things that we don't necessarily share as a part of our identity, our own identity. And two, that compassion as an OT practitioner towards individual clients is required, right? It is so important. However, it is not sufficient. And I do believe that, and maybe this is a slightly controversial thing to say, but I struggle with a practitioner that might say, well, I can work with that person individually, I can support them individually, but that's as far as I would take it. I think particularly in this moment in time, what I understand about people, what I understand about identity requires me to be an advocate, to be outspoken, to be a defender of those that are, whose identity is placing them in harm's way. And so we as a discipline, all of OTs in the world, I believe, have a responsibility to stand up and say things when they have an opportunity at this moment in time.
Beautiful. Well said. I think that's the best way to end it.
I think that's good.
Except,
oh goodness,
maybe we could end on a song. What you got in your back pocket?
I got nothing. There's no song.
Nothing?
Nothing. I'm out on that.
I'll just play some outro music
Okay,
then.
excellent.
Okay. Thank you all for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you for being here, Mr. Hanson.
You're welcome.
See y'all.